Okay, it's time to talk about what's going on in these cattle markets. We'll do a beef market update with Ann Wasko with Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are you doing?
I am great, Sean. How are you today?
Good. You came into the house. You feel like you maybe like remember like Jurassic Park as they're walking through the plains and they have to separate the grass.
What a good problem. What a good problem.
It's great to see.
It is. It
Like
is. It rained again this morning. Nothing big, but it just it seems like we're in that little that system that we keep getting little squirts of rain here and there.
I looked at this week's Saskatchewan crop report and they were talking about percentage of pasture in abundance of moisture. When's the last time you heard that?
It's been a long time. It's been a
Hey,
long time. It's great conditions.
they'll take
Great.
it. The heat's going to come up next week, and
Mhm.
we're really going to see. So we'll get to the cattle markets. What's going on with the cash prices this week?
Well, in the US, Sean, it was one of those weeks where, of course, we had the holiday at midweek. It didn't affect kill or anything like that, but it did mean futures were closed. And so it's been one of those weeks where it's been testing the waters. Because we're coming off of last week of a new high, cash high. The 5 area average, just for listeners, 192.55 last week. So, of course, this week, Packers are kind of trying to let's dial this little back a little bit. Whereas cattle feeders are saying, well, no, we're on a roll. Let's carry on. So there hasn't been a pile of trade. I think we'll see it today. But at the time that we're talking, certainly Texas maybe looked a few sales a little better, and the northern regions may be steady. But we'll see what happens. But we're in that kind of a push me, pull me kind of market. The cutout last night closed up just shy of 323 on the choice cutout. Um, that's up $4.50 from last week. The smaller kills lately have really been helping to kind of keep that prop since Memorial Day. Even at that big money, 323 cutout, Packers he's either side of break even, probably more on the red. So he's trying. That's why he's trying to control the buy this week. This afternoon we've got a U.S. cattle and feed report, and the expectations for this June 1 report would say, like last month, on feed numbers just down a wee bit, down 1% is the guesses. May placements down 2%. Marketing's unchanged. So that's what's going into the report. That's what the futures have got dialed in. It's probably a fairly friendly guesstimate if we come off like that in terms of keeping those on feed numbers down. So that's kind of how we start Friday off in terms of the U.S. Bringing it back to the local market, we did lose some money here in Alberta this week. 432 to 434 delivered dressed was the bids that Canfax was reporting last night. That's kind of 1 to 6 lower dressed. So again, last week's Canfax average was just shy of 264, 263.75 to be exact. I do think this week's average will probably be back into that 260, 261 area. Still phenomenal prices, but probably dialing it back a little bit. It looks to me, Sean, like Packers have, in Western Canada here anyways, have been able to get a few more cattle around them. We knew the third quarter has more cattle placed against it. So they've got a little more in terms of inventory around them. They're stretching the lift times a little bit. And that we talk about leverage or that bargaining power. It's shifting, it's been strongly in the producer's hands for the second quarter. It feels to me like it's shifting a wee bit back to the packer.
Yeah, and the seasonality is working against the producer here a little bit too.
Absolutely. We get into bigger supplies. That's a typical normal summer market. And that's why typically the markets dial back a little bit. And as well, we've got those big demand weekends behind us, that started with our Victoria Day and the Memorial Day and Father's Day and all the rest of it. So those big demand grilling weekends are now behind us, and we get into, as we referred, the dog days of summers, where it's more like hot dogs and hamburgers. So we'll see how things go. But having said that, demand's been really good. I don't want to rain on that parade at all. We'll talk about that some more in a minute.
Yeah, what about out in Ontario? What's been
Oh,
happening price
quiet,
wise there?
quiet.
And of
This
course,
week, Sean, this week's been super quiet in terms of trade. Canfax didn't even have anything to report in terms of trade yet. So I would call the Ontario market quiet.
hmm, strike related, no doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And just before we leave the Alberta thing, we've got the U.S. on feed report this afternoon. The Canadian report for Western Canada was last week, and same kind of theme. This is the CanFax report. On feed numbers on June 1 were actually down 3% versus last year. So we see that gap versus last year here in Western Canada starting to even widen out a little bit more in terms of smaller placements. Yes, cattle are heavier than last year, and that's been a big topic for especially the first half. We do see numbers certainly getting smaller in the second half of 2024, and the same story I think will reign true in the U.S.
StatsCan has some data out on trade. How are we making out year to date, whether it's exports or even look at some of the imports?
Yeah, we'll look at both because they both really tell a story and they really play into supply at the end of the day. The export numbers, and you probably recall me at the end of 2023 talking about, we're going to see smaller production, expect smaller exports. Well, the Canadian export numbers just continue to be solid and surprise me, certainly to the upside, which is a good news because a Japanese consumer is just as important in my books as a Canadian consumer. And so demand has been good, and I think strong exports have been part of it. So this is April dated. I know it's a wee bit dated, but up 4% in April for our total exports to all countries. Year to date, we're now up 7% in volume. If you're just counting money, we're up 8%. So these factors are all really solid in terms of that demand piece. Japan was a solid. I know Japan's still struggling on the economic front, but they were solid for Canadian beef, up 23% in April. Year to date, we're up 12% into Japan. The U.S., we were up 6% in April, so that leaves year to date to the U.S. up 10%. And the other of the top three would be Mexico, and we were up 20% in our exports to Mexico in April. Year to date, we're up 4%. So it was a good month. If we can maintain that kind of pace, Sean, through 24 and keep surprising me, that's a huge part in Canadian beef demand. So it's not just watching what's going on at the restaurant down the road in Lethbridge or in Toronto or what's going on at the counter in Calgary. We have to look at demand export wise as well. Flip side, imports, we've got some of the strongest record lean trim prices. So that's cow beef, if you want to put it another way. Both the U.S. and Canada, record prices. Guess what happens when you have record prices? You tend to be quite attractive for imports. And that's exactly what this is May data that we saw. We were up 12% for beef imports into Canada in the month of May. So year to date, we're up 14%. Remember, two very different products. What's coming in tends to be the hamburger style beef. What we tend to be exporting is high quality middle meats. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but of course, as you would expect, the culprits, maybe that's not the right word to use, for imports were Australia, New Zealand, and Mexico. So those were the three big jumps in imports, and the same story into the U.S. as well.
That's good. A lot of times when we talk about trade, we're talking about the U.S., right? And so a lot of times we don't hear about Mexico. So our exports to Mexico up significantly, but also we're buying a lot of Mexican product as well. That's that USMCA Kuzma deal working in our favor.
Well, and it's a classic reminder to all of us that let this product flow to the highest market, wherever it might be, cattle or beef. It could be here, and of course, North America has record prices, and I know you talked to Lance Zimmerman from Rabobank about what's going on in North America, and we've got the highest prices, in terms of jumps over last year in the world. So good news on that front.
Well, and thanks so much for joining us here this week for the beef market update. Super busy kind of times on the ranch, and like I said, you're just trying to push away all that grass. So
it's a good problem. It's a good problem.
It is very much so. Have yourself a great weekend.
You too, Sean. Thank you.